Good morning. Welcome to the November 2014 elections edition of The Road To. We're happy to have you. I'm Patty Morrissey. I'm your host for today. And we have four amazing political pundits with us to churn over what's going to happen in a few days. Tuesday, that would be. And our first pundit who's been with us forever is Jim Parmalee. Jim, you want to give us a little...
Sure.
Background.
I'm Jim Parmalee. I run the Northern Virginia Republican PAC, Republicans United for Tax Relief, and I also host a show also on this fine station.
All right. And our second person who's been here forever, John Flannery.
Forever. Okay, that's something to contemplate. Well, I'm a recovering federal prosecutor. You never get over having that kind of authority or power as a young person. And I've been a Hill rat, worked on the Hill in the Senate and the House side. And I'm in private practice representing the abused and misunderstood in a firm I have with Campbell Flannery, it's called. And I opine on matters political and legal. And I look forward to joining this group as being less partisan than the elections that are surrounding us.
Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. And thirdly, Mike Lane on our right.
Patty, thank you for having me back. It's a thrill to be here. Our regular viewers may recall I'm the inside the Beltway guy. I live in the city of Alexandria, although I got my political start in the county of Arlington. Once upon a time, I was sentenced to a term of service as a county board member there. Fortunately, the voters realized their mistake and showed me the door the next cycle. I've been a party chairman in a locality in a congressional district, and now I help people get elected to public office.
Great, great. And last but not least, Marlene Wecker-Barney, who often hosts the show.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I am filling or trying to fill the shoes of Phyllis Randall today. They're big shoes to fill, and I don't mean that literally, but she's wonderful, and I just want to say that our thoughts and prayers go out to her and her family. She lost her father yesterday. So wherever you are, Phyllis, we love you. Mm-hmm. I am, as Patty mentioned, usually the co-host. I'm the co-producer, although my personal opinions are not reflecting necessarily the opinions of the show, but probably maybe they do. I'm a recently retired high school special education English teacher, community activist, active in local politics. I recently formed a group called Educators for Faust, and I'm happy to be here.
We'll talk about that race in a minute. Our producer did want us to spend a little time talking about the death of Ben Bradlee, President and CEO of the Washington Post, and what did they call him? The editor of legendary impact. And so if anyone would want to make some comments on that and the passing of an era, I guess you could say.
Well, no one is perfect, obviously, but the significant thing he did was to encourage the Fourth Estate with showing some courage against courts and presidents to follow the truth wherever it went. And I bet the private conversations that we've never heard in the press room when he was making those decisions would be better than any movie or book that's happened since. But like all people with power, there are other things that he's done that not all of us would celebrate.
Okay. Anyone else?
There's no comment. I didn't know him. I read a lot about him. He was a gutsy guy. I think that he took investigative reporting to a higher level, and I admire him for encouraging the two reporters, Carl Bernstein and what's the other
Bob
guy?
Woodward.
Bob Woodward.
Bob Woodward, yeah. How could I forget that on the Watergate break-in? So I think that we miss him.
Well, moving on to less attractive topics, we're going to talk a little bit about how Ebola has been used or not used in a political sense, and we'll get some people to weigh in on that. Jim, do you want to start?
Well, I'm not sure in a political sense. I think people are a little surprised at the changing definitions of what we're supposed to and not supposed to do about Ebola. Do you quarantine people? Do you not quarantine them? What do you do at the airports? I mean, we seem to be getting conflicting information about how contagious it is. They'll say, oh, it's not contagious. You have to have direct contact with fluids. But then they question the CDC guy, and he says, well, if you're 3 feet away, that could be a problem too. Just describing just about every subway car in America. So, I mean, I'm going to guess the truth is somewhere in between, but it does seem we've had a bit of a muddled response to this. And luckily, it seems to not be as contagious as originally thought, because that original family in Texas, where the person died, evidently, even though they were carrying around his sweat-covered blanket all day, none of them got Ebola, which is amazing, yeah. And they carried it to the hospital, and they carried it back to the hospital. And I was thinking they're just dragging this virus all over town, and nobody caught it except the poor healthcare workers.
The nurses, yeah.
Well, the big debate, I guess, has been how do you measure the fear versus the science? And we've had a recent discussion about what does quarantine mean. And my wife Holly said to me, it's really simpler. We have animals. When we introduce animals onto our property, we quarantine them for a certain period. So should humans be treated less carefully than we would treat our own animals with care? And I think that that's true. What we don't know is what the quarantine guards against. It's not a personal assertion about we want to constrain your liberty. And in the case of the nurse who's now in Maine, in which a judge ruled that the quarantine was too restrictive, you have to consider the fact that she really was in touch with people. And if she followed the protocols, maybe she is asymptomatic and doesn't have a problem. But what is the big deal about waiting a certain number of days to be absolutely certain? Because the consequences of an error can be significant. And like Jim, yeah, life or death, or at least great pain and great upsettedness
and suffering.
And suffering. Yes, it's very serious. I mean, if you survive it, we see from the people who we believe have, they've gone through terrible pain because it sort of reaches a peak and it either turns in a good direction and you recover or you don't. And that's a horrendous experience for any human to have, and all the people that care about that person, and then all the fears they have in the community of did I shake his or her hand or was I with them?
How did you feel about the Chris Christie, and this is for everybody, requirement?
Andrew Cuomo.
And
Cuomo,
and then he
Republican
Cuomo
and a Democrat, both doing it.
But there's a lot of I think a responsible responsible for public safety as a core job description of our political leadership. There's a lot of angst about where to draw the line, that it's not too far into someone's civil liberties or that it's going to jeopardize public safety.
Well, I think we were kind of blindsided by the whole Ebola thing, and as Jim said, I seldom agree with Jim, but I think our response has been kind of muddled. I mean, we've known about Ebola since 1976, and it's been almost like a pandemic proportions in West Africa for quite a while now, and yet we were just like not prepared, it seemed like. I don't know whether part of that is the fact that we haven't had a Surgeon General for a while, and maybe that has nothing to do with it, but it does seem to me that it's been a little bit politicized in as far as calling for the travel ban, and then maybe even the reaction with the quarantines and Chris Christie sticking this nurse who was asymptomatic in a
She had a fever though, 101 fever when
well,
they first took it,
apparently that
and
was
then
one
later.
reading, and then they took another reading that same day.
But you
and
can't blame if you're a healthcare if you're at the airport and the woman who's been a nurse with Ebola patients has 101 fever, even if you later find out the instrument may have been wrong. But it read 101.
There are different ways to take temperatures, and one of them now is that they actually put it on the skin of your forehead.
You're not allowed to touch the forehead of somebody who has
and
Ebola.
she was flushed. And her regular temperature taken all other ways was normal. And the physician in New Jersey who took her temperature said immediately, oh, that's because you were flushed. In other words, medical professionals knew the difference between the two. I'm not saying that one thing should determine or not.
If you
but-
saw 101 on that thermometer, I think we'd all
You'd
be a
all
little.
wonder-
We all might err on the side of caution
Well,
for a little while. at
Yeah,
least.
but if you have people administering the thing who don't know what they're doing, just like the ones that either don't follow the protocol or the protocol is insufficient or whatever it is, all of these are places for error in the system. And then you add to it the mix of everybody just being afraid I might catch Ebola. My sneeze, if you saw on Facebook, somebody says, I sneeze, could I have Ebola? And some were joking and some were not.
Yeah.
And the ignorance of the public about things medical is critical
But the ignorance
to
of the
how
CDC
we make decisions.
too. The ignorance of the CDC, or at least some people at the CDC also. I'll give you the director. We don't have a Surgeon General, but we do have a director of the CDC, and he says on TV, you have to touch fluids and so on. And then the CNN person says, what about your own standards say, what if you're 3 feet away? Oh yeah, 3 feet away too. So the guy gave conflicting information in the same interview. And then, yes, there was the mistake of they took her temperature, it was 101. They got very upset, and the temperature reading may have been incorrect. On the other hand,
You guys,
when
without-
the other hand, this is important. On the other hand, when the nurse calls in to the CDC hotline and says, "Yes, I have a fever," and they say, "Go ahead and get on a commercial plane,"
yeah.
it's like so they're making mistakes on both ends of that scale.
Well, I assume
This
the
is
last
a-
thing I'll hear before I leave this planet will be, oops. And I think that's a function of what we see here. And when we have spokesperson for these different organizations, often we have a flack who is not a practicing physician. And so then we get these kind of clumsy explanations. I would rather have an inarticulate doctor stand before a camera, be asked questions, and then have to use the knowledge that he has to talk to us. And here's another thing, while we're piling on for American preparedness and American exceptionalism, we apparently don't have enough outfits for those people to protect themselves because they're disposable.
Yeah.
And so that's low.
Right,
And then,
in fact, they have to be
and then
destroyed after each use.
Right, and the vaccines that we don't have them in sufficient quantity for whatever the standards were, and they're actually being retested to see if the stock that we have has a longer life than we thought it had to be effective. I mean,
And I don't think there is a
Yeah, but-
vaccine
I
for
think this just
Ebola.
underscores
I think it's
the
experimental.
American health system, and this is what the
if you-
Affordable
This
Care
is-
Act is about,
to
is
me-
way behind
Hold
the
it.
world.
Really important issue from
Everybody
a-
here gets to pick. If you had to have Ebola, what country would you want to have Ebola in? And it would be right here with our medical system.
Okay,
you
but
tell me what other
Jim,
country you want to
let's
go
get out of
to.
the weeds
If
here
I
because
wanted
this
to
is
have
a
Ebola.
great.
If you had to.
This is a great example of an issue that's very complex. The science of molecular biology and viral, issues is very, very complex. So we're trying to take this very complex issue and translate it into public action, and it's that classic public safety versus civil liberties, right? I mean, we deal with this all the time with information technology, and it makes me think of a lot of the things going on in terms of cyber attack that normal people don't understand at all, and they're outraged that the government might have some, responsibility to protect our information backbone. So it's just sort of, I think, another example of in this world where globalization is turning out new viruses, spreading them quickly. It's just another example why I think we need political leadership that is extremely knowledgeable about these types of things. So anyway, that's my little speech. But I think we need to move on to the actual races. And we're going to start with, just in general, I guess, get some comments on how nasty you think this race cycle has been, what you've observed in terms of money in politics, and kind of who's winning that battle. I'll start with Mike for now, because he's not gotten enough.
Thank you. I've been in this game for a long time. I don't have a weak stomach. I'm not squeamish. In fact, I relish a hard-fought political battle that sometimes will descend into the gutter. This has been the most disgusting cycle, almost all the way around, that I've ever seen. It has descended beneath even my standards for dirty campaigning, which is not high. And it's all the way around. I'll freely admit that there's hardly anyone who has not descended into the gutter at this point. Hopefully, things go in cycles, and I'm very hopeful that the pendulum has swung as far as it will to one side, and will, as a result of people's reaction, if it's the same as mine, begin to swing back a little bit, so that we have a little bit less of the kind of campaign that we've had this time. It may be that the rest of the country doesn't share my particular view, and as I think the polls show that they were actually ahead of me, that they were disgusted with it before.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, even when the public shows that they're disgusted with it for the last 10 years, this year we descend lower than ever. But I'm hopeful we'll swing back.
Okay, Marlene?
Well, it would be nice to think we swing back, but I don't think we ever swing back. I think politics is kind of like a boxing match. It's part strategy and footwork and groundwork and part punch. And if your opponent punches you, you punch back. Or sometimes you want to punch first. So I think that's just
a good
the nature.
metaphor.
Thank you. I think that's just the nature of politics. I
What
get
about the
tired.
truth, though?
I get tired of the negative ads and the exaggeration of the bad things, or
And
things getting
and
taken out of
sometimes
context.
Exaggeration is
Yeah.
a nice way to say they lie. So
Yeah,
Well, there's
and
there's an
things are
epidemic.
taken out of context, and I would like to see more of a balance of the positive along with the negative. But it always seems like the negative kind of dominates.
okay, Jim.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, it unfortunately seems to be business as usual. Democrats run negative ads, and they think that the Republicans think they're misleading. Republicans run negative ads, and Democrats think they're misleading. So, I think that a lot of the races have been negative, but I think they've been negative in a lot of other years too.
Yeah.
So people just have to try to figure out which are accurate and which are not.
Yeah.
I think the most significant change has been, and the reason I think Mike feels the way he does, is because there are so many lanes of traffic, now electronic, by which we get bombarded with this stuff. Robocalls, Facebook, emails, and there's less foreplay in the sense that you get an ad and says, okay, choose one, 5, 10, 25, whatever it is, both parties. I did an editorial about, I just said you can't send me anything to the Democrats, my party. And what I get from Republicans is I've been doing the same thing every day. I'm saying, forget it. You don't tell me a thing about the campaign. You don't tell me what you're going to do. Just
Give me your money.
He's a terrible person, and you pay, and you got to pay it by midnight. And you're reading stuff
Right,
that
and you'll be
contradicts.
triple matched on every single thing you
Yeah,
have.
yeah,
Like
double
there's
match,
any-
triple
right.
match, and who is that person? Why
Right.
don't you just
They
ask
don't
him to put it
exist.
down? You don't need me to give you $5 if this guy's going to give you 15 or 40 or
Right.
whatever.
Or 4,000,
And because of electronics and the technology, the pace has changed. A million years ago we talked about fax mentality. What do we have now? I mean, we have light speed, and the truth doesn't have a chance of catching up to whether it's an exaggeration, a contextual error, or a lie. And both sides, I see things on both sides. And knowing something about the law, I see people characterizing cases or a prosecution or something like that. And then when you put it in context, in both directions, it happens. Professionals of a certain age will have lawsuits. People exaggerate in those pleadings, and then they quote those pleadings and ignore the result. And they said it was, a confidential settlement, which is almost always true in all litigation these days. So it relies upon a public not having the time to investigate every one of these things that they get.
Exactly.
And the parties are sending out things saying, you didn't vote in this last election, or you didn't vote 2 elections ago. They insult you and then say that. I got emails within minutes, not for several days, within minutes of actually contributing to Mr. Faust. I know this comes as a big surprise. And I'm getting petitions from the party and from him for me to contribute to him. And then, okay, so I understand the first few minutes, but in the electronic age, the next day and the day after that,
Because you
But-
already gave him, if you gave him money once, the idea is
Well, I
you'll
know
give
how
it
it
again and
works.
again and again and again and again.
yeah, but I
So,
gave a decent contribution. I didn't give $5. So
You're on every list in America.
Well,
now
I've been.
for
I'm on
Democrats.
every
Yes,
list.
exactly.
I am on every.
Rest of your life.
I am on
That was
every
your
list
first
in America.
mistake.
Anyhow,
That was your first
I've been.
mistake.
I've been a
We
genetic
won't get into what
Democrat.
lists those are, John.
Well, every fundraising list for Democrats
Yeah.
in America probably.
Here's
Marlene, what were you
$100.
gonna say?
Unsubscribe.
I was-
Forget it.
I was just
Forget
gonna
it.
Never. He'll give again.
Marlene's going to
I
make
was
a
just
point.
going to say that I deplore that it's necessary to have so much money and that you have to raise so much money to be a candidate. I think it eliminates a lot of, really, really good candidates and good leadership because it requires millions of dollars to run for,
And it obviously
congressional
takes away
office or-
from the substance, which
It
kind of
does.
circles back to my point earlier, which was a little bit clumsily made, that we need really smart people in office.
Yes.
And a lot of really smart people have other really good jobs, and they're not going to run for office if it's 80% begging people for money and
Yeah.
20% working.
Well,
what does that
exactly,
do?
and I
well,
hate
but
this.
it's worse than that. You spend a whole lifetime building whomever you are, and then win or lose, you get branded for the rest of your
Some
life
really
as
nasty
some
thing, yeah.
scurrilous individual who
Yeah.
fooled everybody to get elected.
I'll give you an
It's pretty
example.
strong
Mitt
stuff.
Romney didn't need to run for president. Man's got a lot of money, got a large, great family. He's very successful at business, all that stuff, and he had no need to run for president. Runs for president, and people tear him down, say horrible things about him and stuff like that. So there are still good people who run, whether you like his policies or not.
Well, if you
gotta
have more
admit the
money
man
than
was
God,
successful.
it's easy to run, right? Because you don't really
Well,
have to spend a lot.
no, but
but
you
spent a
your
lot of
point
money. You
taken
raised a lot
that
of money, yeah.
He had to
you
raise
run
a lot of money,
you
too.
run the risk of having your good reputation ripped apart on.
John McCain, for
Stupid
instance,
thing.
ran for
Yeah.
president. A fantastic person, and people went and attacked him. So it happened.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
the thing about running for office has become apparently so restrictive that we are getting not the creme de la creme running. We're getting some of the worst in both parties. And as a
Yeah,
result, what is
exactly.
our national debate about? It's not about how do we get around our checks and balances so instead of paralysis, we're not a dysfunctional government, we can actually accomplish something, and
Yeah.
can we agree on what those things should be?
My point
and that was not
earlier
discussed
was
at all.
You've got to have cream of the crop in office in a world where things are economically connected and intricate and complex, environmentally, all those issues.
It's more like mud
we got a
wrestling.
couple minutes. Want to get started just on discussing the actual races, and there are four Senate races that are seen as very vulnerable or very, could go either way. And we had Mark Pryor versus Tom Cotton in Arkansas, Mary Landrieu versus Bill. Oh, there's two of them. Sorry, I don't have all these memorized. Apologize. Congressman Cassidy and Rob Main's Tea Party candidate in Louisiana. North Carolina race between Kay Hagan and Tom Tillis has been chatted about quite a bit because it's been about a 1-point race for months apparently. And then Mitch McConnell and Allison Lonergan Grimes in Kentucky. Those are the ones that are talked about. Let's each pick one real quick because we only have 3 minutes left and until our break, and we'll be back and we can talk about it. But just a quick overview.
I think the Tillis race is really the one to watch. I mean, it's close, and he lost what could have been a lead at the beginning. He had an advantage at the beginning, lost
again,
that.
this is North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Kay Hagan's been in one term.
Right, and so a lot of folks thought Hagan was in trouble. Then it looked like she might not be. Now it looks like she is again. He's finishing strong. A lot of independent groups have gotten involved there, and I think in the end it's going to be close. But
is that
I
a
think he's going to
euphemism
pull it
for
out.
people from outside the state? Or large
On both sides, on
definitely.
both sides, people from outside the state. But I think the groups coming in from outside the state on the Republican side have been more effective, and I think that's going to help push him to victory by by 1 point at the end. It's
I'm
going to be
not sure
close.
because
It's going to be close.
she's
I
been
think-
tying him to the state legislature, which people are really upset with. John.
Well, rather than shift races, I think that money in this to take over the Senate flows in from everybody. So it just sort of neutralizes as an issue. You can't say it's carpetbagging money because everybody's putting money in these races. Yeah. North Carolina, I think it's close, but I think it leans Democratic. And I think what we'll find in all of these races, which becomes an argument, is what's the turnout going to be in an off-year election? And the biggest tragedy of the election, besides not talking about how we make government work, is all the non-voters that don't come. And a subgroup of that is has there been a suppression of the vote or not? And we'll have the numbers soon, so we'll see.
Okay, we'll do a quick, Marlene.
I think Hagan is going to win it by a couple of points. There's another candidate, a Libertarian candidate, Sean Howe. I think he's going to take more votes away from Tillis. He'll shave maybe a point or so off. So I think Hagan's going to win.
Latest polls in Carolina. It's interesting that we all think
everyone's talking about Carolina.
It's the bellwether race. It's the bellwether race. Hagan's up in the latest Real Clear Politics average by 1 point, 43-42, and your Libertarian is polling at 4%. So he's actually overperforming given what they are. The old adage about if an incumbent can't get close to 50% or close to 50% in a three-way race, she's in trouble. And on election day, I'm not sure that applies here. Look, we're not into issues. We're into get out the vote. Who has the better get out the vote thing going on? And Hagan's campaign right now, as of yesterday, is overperforming against Tillis in the early voting get out the vote, including getting the minority vote out, which hit 30%. Which hit 30%.
All right, we're going to get back to individual campaigns after we take a break. We'll be right back with part 2 of The Road 2.
Since September 11th, there have been hundreds of violent attacks against innocent Americans.
Remember what that flag you're waving stands for. Remember, please stop the hate.
We're stronger when we are united.
Remember
what that flag you're waving stands for. One nation.
Under God.
Indivisible.
With liberty.
And justice.
For all.
In America, there's either room for everyone, or it's not America.
Don't pick the wrong fight.
Let's keep America land of the free.
Stop the hate.
You'd never know it on the battlefield. But nearly half of today's military are National Guard and reservists. However, they can't answer our nation's call without their employer's support. If you're an employer, visit esgr.org and find out how to do your part. After all, their response depends on yours.
This is Mommy's bed. Me and Jenny were jumping on it. Mommy's gun fell on the floor. I was a cowboy. Bang, 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 bang. I said, Jenny, wake up, it's just pretend. But she wouldn't wake up.
I'm sick of this. I'm sick of dealing with you. I'm sick of
I work 6 days a week.
Who
do you think you
Stand
are?
up straight. Don't you ever talk back to me again! You just shut up!
What are you crying about?
What a child learns about violence, a child learns for life. Teach carefully. We can show you how. Act Against Violence. Call 877-ACT-WISE for a free brochure.
Sweetheart, smoke outside now. You promised.
Okay, hon.
Sweetheart, smoke outside now. You promised.
What kind of man are you?
I'm a father.
Look here, my father was a father, and he smoked his brains out in the house.
Watch as he blows those smoke rings on my little red face.
You probably have asthma.
Asthma? Schmasma. I'm telling you, nothing's gonna happen to your kids.
I swear.
Don't swear when you're lying. You know very well that thousands of kids get bronchitis, ear infections, and even pneumonia from their parents' cigarette smoke. And didn't you promise your little angels you'd smoke outside?
Hey, Daddy.
Those little devils are just so sweet.
Do the right thing.
Please, smoke outside.
Until you can stop, go out for your kids.
Take the pledge. Call 1-800-513-1157.
As time flows on, there are places we return to again and again. Precious places. Timeless places. Places that, with your help, can endure forever. I'm Paul Newman. Help the Nature Conservancy save the last great places around the world.
Welcome back to the second half of The Road to, our prediction show. We're going to take a little bit more time on the Senate races because we touched on the North Carolina one, but there are other races out there. And actually the New Hampshire race is interesting too. But I want to give you guys a little bit more time, starting with Mike, who's got his sort of pseudo iPad with him. And
my Surface.
And anything you on the Arkansas, Louisiana races? How about the Florida race too?
Okay, I'll hit quickly on all three, and people can tell me where I'm wrong.
Okay.
I think Tom Cotton, the Republican, beats Pryor, the incumbent Democrat in Arkansas. And I think he does it rather comfortably. Arkansas.
And that's considered a toss-up?
I don't think so. No, I think Cotton's expected to win that at this point. Arkansas has just trended over the last 20 years to going from a total Democrat state to a total Republican state.
What is that all about?
I think it's social issues. They just.
The Mike Huckabee mold.
Yeah, I mean it's a very religious state. It's a very traditional state, and they see policy of the party they used to embrace, the Democrats, as being oriented towards the big urban areas, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and it just doesn't fit in with what Arkansas thinks is the right way to go.
Angle. Okay.
All right. The other two, what was the second one? Louisiana. Louisiana, I think, is probably going to go to a runoff. The Tea Party guy, Manis, is the spoiler in that, and probably should have gotten out, in my opinion.
That's Mary Landrieu's seat.
That's Mary Landrieu's seat, the incumbent.
2 terms, right?
Should have been 3 terms, I think. Three-term incumbent.
She's not even that old.
And I think it's going to go to a runoff, which means that they're going to have to go through all of this again the first week in December. And I don't think that Landrieu is going to be able to turn her votes out twice in a row. Her people are not as hungry as the Republicans are, so I think that seat flips Republican for that reason. And then in Florida, I assume we're talking about the governor's race.
Yeah.
Oh man, what a disaster that is. I think what you have down there is an electorate where the Democrats are going to go to the polls, they're going to totally hold their nose and vote for Charlie Crist because they hate him. The Republicans are going to go and hold their nose and vote for Rick Scott because they hate him, and we'll see who hates their own candidate more.
Okay, interesting. All right, let's go back to Jim. What any of the Senate races that you're watching closely?
Well, Ed Gillespie. Of course.
Well, okay. Let's
Shall
get
we
to
go to
that one in
Virginia?
just a second. We're going to
one.
move into Virginia close when we care about the most. John, what about you?
Well,
Anything
going
else?
backwards from the ones that Mike was reviewing, I think Crist is going to do it in Florida for a couple of reasons. The contrast, I think, has become important, even between the nose holding. A friend of mine down there who saw my remark favoring Crist said, oh, I don't know who I'm going to vote for now. And I said, well, Crist is closer to your views. He's a Republican than he may be to mine. But I think he's a really good public servant. That's why I think he would make a good governor.
Yeah.
Again.
Does he have any personal values or any deeply held thoughts?
Well, I'll tell you, the reason I got to know him was when he was Attorney General, I had a criminal case, and one of his lawyers argued against me on the appeal. And he offered a case in favor of my position during the appeal, which reflected something about that kind of a legal office. Crist became the governor.
They are watching.
And that he was being helpful. I mean, a lot of advocates won't do that, and I talked to the lawyer afterwards. Then I made a petition to the court for a pardon for my client, and that same lawyer who'd been in his office wrote something agreeing that he should get a pardon. And Crist, although the normal appellate process is 5 minutes, gave me an hour to talk. And at the end of it, he made a motion for a complete and full pardon. Well, that meant he had to contradict his position as Attorney General. but it reflected scrutiny of the facts, and it's a complicated case. But studying the
so
judgment,
he doesn't just look good, is what
he doesn't
John's
just
point.
look good. He's a very serious.
You know what? His tan should be as good as mine. At least mine's real. He puts goo and stuff on.
Oh,
Well,
we
you
can
see-
start on John Boehner. Okay, but
well, let me say one thing about Landro. I want
Oh, okay, sorry. Go ahead.
The Louisiana case, I think, is very interesting to me because Towson, for instance, made some remark about that race. He was a congressman in Louisiana. For years, he was a Democrat. No Republicans ran against him. He switched to the Republican Party. No Democrats ran against him. And his analysis was, when he was running, it wasn't that he was a super candidate. He said it was that the partisanship didn't matter as much. And how that plays into this race is Landro is the chairman of the Energy Committee who has supported the pipeline against most Democratic views and introduced a bill and passed it out of her committee and strongly represented the energy industry in her state. Now sees these people that she's been helping going partisan to change the Senate despite all the votes that she's given them. Now she has a push in the final days, the same get out the vote question again, to see if she can do well enough that there isn't a runoff. Almost everybody says there'll probably be a runoff exactly for the reasons that Mike says. And it will be like another election in the sense of can you gin up your people to get out on both sides?
Yeah.
And so that's a difficult race to call, but it's one of the most interesting politically for exactly the reasons Mike and I were saying, I think.
Yeah, very interesting. Thanks for that analysis, John. Do you want to switch into the Virginia race, or
No,
do you have
I have
something
a few
else?
things
Okay.
to say. Okay, so
Just want to make sure we have time for our own.
Well, in the Florida race, I think Krista's going to pull it off there. I think the whole debacle in the debate with the electric fan was just like kind of the icing on the cake with that one.
Fan or no fan?
The debacle
Yeah.
that the Democratic candidate seems to can't travel anywhere without a fan.
Oh, I'm not going to get into it.
If that were the worst grievance of a political
hurts the
candidate.
There are plenty of
Republican.
times where I can use
That's
the
not
fan,
exactly
so let's not talk about that.
electronics, but anyway,
you know.
Mitch McConnell and Allison
They call that
Lundgren
fan gate, by the way.
Grimes.
They do. They are. Yeah.
Philly. Okay. Oh, yes, Kentucky.
Yeah, that's very close, I think. I would like to see Grimes pull that off. I think she can. McConnell has been there forever. He's not that popular anymore.
He's up in the
The
polls,
Clintons.
though.
He's up in the
It is
polls.
a Republican
Yeah,
state, so
and it is. And
that's a turnout issue, too,
the,
right?
Yeah,
let me make my
almost
prediction.
everything's turnout at this point.
So the Clintons have been down there stumping, and Elizabeth Warren has been stumping for her. I think that will help her.
Has the president
It
been
did
down there
not
stumping
help
for her?
that it did not help that she said that
Troublemaker.
she didn't want to disclose her vote in the presidential election, but hopefully she'll pull that out.
Did you hear her explanation for that, though? I thought it was
No.
totally legit. She's
Oh,
Secretary
the privacy?
of State.
Yeah.
The private ballot historically has been a huge thing. You know, and I just think if you're in that position and that's sort of your part of your ethical code, that maybe, yeah, your first reaction would be not to tell, you know, just
I
don't
think
tell. My parents did that.
Yeah, I think, and a lot of people don't want to, and I think it would have been more credible had she not said that she voted for Hillary.
Yeah, that she
Yeah, I mean, once you do that, you've opened the door
that's
to
sort
who
of-
you're
I
going to vote
think-
for. And everybody knew she didn't want to say the president's name. She didn't want to say she voted for Obama, and she should have just said, "I'm a Democrat. I voted for the president, and I've been disappointed."
Or I share his values.
And that's
but she didn't want to say that.
And
She
that's
didn't want to say that.
Yesterday, David Pryor handled it exactly that way, and it just went right past. Okay.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I voted for him. I was
Speaking
disappointed.
Speaking
Moving on.
of Pryor, he's vulnerable right now. I think Cotton is leading in the polls. They say there was a study done where they said people in the end vote for who has the friendliest face. To me, I think Pryor does. But I can't really make a prediction there. I'd like to see Pryor win it. He is the known person, but Cotton is performing very well. Landrieu and Cassidy and Manis, I think Cassidy and Manis split the vote. They say that I think Landrieu has to get around 47% for there not to be a runoff. And
I think 50. I think
Was
she
it
has to get 50,
I heard one pundit say 46 or 47%.
I think what they're saying in analyzing how the runoff would go if she's at 47% and the other two split the vote, then that positions her well for the runoff.
Okay.
But to avoid the runoff, you have to get 50 plus 1.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think Landrieu will pull
Stuff
it off.
Stuff that political junkies
we
know
already
and
talked
no
about
one else
the other
does.
one. So you want me to just go ahead with Warner and Gillespie?
Yeah, go ahead and transition.
Well, let me say one thing about all the races before we get into that. There's been a competing argument that works in some states, many of them, and not others, both Senate and congressional races, and it is, okay, you voted with the president for 97%. And so, therefore, that's an issue against you. Okay, that's a legitimate issue.
For some people.
Well, for some people, but if you want to make it an issue. But the interesting thing is Bush in his 6th year was not a guy that you wanted standing next to you during the election. And Obama is a guy in his 6th year who has got the same thing. And one of the interesting things that mutes that a little bit is the displeasure of the elected bodies themselves, of Congress. There's a very strong feeling against our elected officials. So we have an unpredictable thing going on here. And Colorado, for instance, which they think is one of the bellwether states, in which the vote was off when they were predicting that before, will that affect now? Well, this is so much stargazing, you know. What does it really mean? I think you can sort of take the polls at face value as a snapshot of where we are. And I like to look at trend lines. I think Mike does the same thing. If a trend's going a certain way, something really has to happen to change it, so that can make elections predictable.
Very complex to try to understand.
And to get out the vote.
dynamics.
But all of that said, I think it's going to be a relatively good day for Republicans in both houses, and not in the governorships necessarily, probably not. And
What do you
but
think
we're
is
still
at
going to
the
have paralysis
What is
in
at
the
the
end.
center of that? What is at the center of that?
Local issues, it's harder to tie people. That's why Virginia has elections off the federal elections, you know,
So
to
people can
avoid
focus on
the
the
influence of that. Now, these other states obviously are not in that category, but the influence is not the same. Although, for instance, in Maine, you see the national political stars of the Democratic and Republican parties going up there and talking anyhow. So I don't know if that would be my political advice in those races, but that's how both parties are handling it up there. But the governorship's allowed to say, I've done A, B, and C for your state. And that takes me out, and they can also say, and the federal government at arm's length, you know, I'm glad to take from them and they shouldn't take from us. You know, you can make all those issues. So the governor's races are differently, and there's some pundits that say the president has devised a way to help those governor's races. I don't know how much of that is just a political defense game and how much is real, because it's sort of like saying, well, the president's good in some places where mostly he doesn't matter, and he's, you know. But
I'm very confused with the polls in general.
I think the polls are confused because the public is volatile. In the races we're looking at to make a difference.
The pollsters this cycle, well, for the last 3 cycles, the pollsters have been struggling with their model as to who is a likely voter. And I don't, you know, we'll find out after Election Day which poll figured out in advance who was a likely voter and which ones got it wrong. But I think the electorate has been so volatile in terms of coming out and not, that nobody really is confident that they can design a model sample, a universe, as they call it in polling, as to who exactly is going to vote on Election Day. That's one of the confusing issues, I think.
Yeah. And that said, Mark Warner's going to roll over.
Well, let's go to the Virginia race. Let's go back to Jim and just any of things you'd like to observe. Mark Warner's up by, I don't remember how many at this point.
Well, it depends on the polling, but some polls show him pretty close. And I think, you know, if depending on what sort of wave you have, Gillespie's been out there doing a lot of campaigning, you know, trying to point out a lot of the flaws in Mark Warner's record. You know, I think the 97% ads, the ones that point out that Mark Warner votes with President Obama 97% of the time, I think those have been pretty effective. And so the question is going to be, in Virginia, how many folks are upset with that? And will that overlook some of the goodwill Warner has from being around a long time? And I think Ed Gillespie can win this thing.
See, I think Mark has made a good case politically while he's been in office, before he was a candidate, about being in groups of Democrats and Republicans trying to address and solve certain problems, which was the mark of his administration as governor. And
but he doesn't vote for those things. That's the
No,
problem.
he has voted for compromises. He's advanced them, and then his message as a candidate, for example, on one of the key issues Republicans like to use, which is the Affordable Care Act, is to say, I think we should make revisions, which has become the talking point across America.
But why didn't he offer those amendments in the beginning? Why did he vote for what everybody agrees is a disaster?
I don't agree with
any amendments.
I don't think he believed it was a disaster, nor do I believe that. And now
Which is why you guys don't really want to make amendments.
Well, we don't have to worry about it. In fact,
right,
it could hurt.
Get past the elections, and then nobody has to change anything.
McConnell said it. At least for 2 years, no matter what happens next Tuesday, the Affordable Care Act stays as it is, because there will not be 2/3 Republican Senate. And anything that gets passed,
the damage it is doing will continue for at least 2 more years.
No, what's going to happen?
The problem is, how do we start to fix
what's going to
the
happen?
Damage it has caused?
What's going to happen is the bureaucratic stuff is going to be cured, and the amendments that we need, because it's already working. It's already working.
It's already throwing people off of insurance plans.
No, that's old stuff. That's old stuff.
It's not old stuff for people like
old stuff.
For people who have lost their plans. The president said you can keep if you want to keep your plan,
but it's not true anymore.
He lied.
It's not true.
Evidently, he lied. That was the PolitiFact.
He lied.
PolitiFact.
When he runs for president the next time, use that against him.
PolitiFact called it the lie of the year.
Conversation here
about the truth. I understand this could be a problem for the president.
It's not about the truth. It's about position.
Mark Warner voted for a plan that has hurt a lot of people with health care, hurt a lot of people.
So where is the data on that? Where is the data on that? This goes back to
we've discussed this before. A lot of people with plans that they liked don't have them anymore because of that. People who wanted to see specific doctors, a lot of them can't see those specific doctors anymore because of Obamacare's forced lack of choice in a lot of areas.
When Mark wins, will you admit that the population of Virginia decided that vote and his other votes are fine in Virginia?
I'll admit that the Virginians took a look at it and decided that despite his many flaws, they're going to give him another shot. I think they're going to give Ed Gillespie a shot to clean up Mark Warner's mess.
Oh, really?
I think first, number one, I think that the Republicans overestimate the unpopularity of Obama and his policies.
They won't appear with him in public.
Yeah, they do. He won
Democrats
by a
must have overestimated too.
Twice. And I think that a lot of Democrats, or some Democrats, have bought into the Republican overestimation of Obama's unpopularity.
I invite the president to come campaign with Mark Warner all weekend
still
this
like
year.
him and still realize that the inability of us to move forward and solve problems is because of the gridlock in Congress and the partisanship and the obstructionist in Congress.
Trying to slow down the damage that President Obama is doing to our economy.
I think that the typical voter is more intelligent than Republicans think they are, number one.
I think the typical voter is upset about the poor economy that the president has presided over.
Please? I think that the Affordable Care Act is also overestimated by the Republicans as far as unpopularity. Yes, people are losing their plans. They have to pay higher premiums. Guess what?
Sometimes.
This happened before the Affordable Care Act. If you worked for a company and they decided next year they were going to change to a different provider, you didn't have a choice in that, and maybe you lost your doctors. I had doctors that went off network because the plan changed. In my
You're not seriously comparing private
and your
insurance
premiums
through
usually
employers
went
to Obamacare,
up,
are you?
And your insurance premiums
Obamacare
have
is
been
based on the
trending
private
up.
insurance industry.
Obamacare has
Let's
stepped
not
in
go there,
and
though. That'll
told
be a-
private insurance they can't do
but
things they used to.
The Affordable Care Act
There's
is
some
based
good,
on
some
private
bad.
insurance companies.
You guys,
but-
we need to get
Destroyed.
Yeah,
Let's
we
talk
do.
about
But
why
anyway,
John Faust is
Warner-
going to
Yeah,
beat Barbara
we need to-
Comstock.
to-
Warner and Gillespie, I think
Are we
Warner
turning to
will,
the Disney section of
excuse me,
today's?
I think Warner beats
A fairy
Gillespie.
tale.
When Mike is quiet.
All right,
you
let
know,
Marlene finish
He's
her
unpopu-
analysis of the
he-
Senate.
Okay, Mark Warner is popular. He's a centrist. He works across the aisle. He was part of the Gang of Six. He at least is trying to solve problems. I think that he will win in double digits, so at least by 10 points, if not more.
Okay.
And-
We got to go to the congressionals,
if I
guys,
may.
because we're
And-
running out of time,
if I
and we
may.
need to cover them because that's what this show's about.
I'll take that bet.
Okay. All right. So we've got
margin.
3 districts.
Yes, not the
We've got 3
result.
districts
I'll take
in
the
the
bet.
area that we need to look at. The 8th, which is Don Beyer and Micah Edmond. The 10th, which is John Faust versus Barbara Comstock. And the 11th, which is Jerry Conley versus Suzanne Schulte. So I'm going to let you guys pick and choose the ones you want to discuss, but in the context of how the issues, let's look at the issues, let's not talk about polls, let's talk about what are they talking about that people care about and how it might translate into votes.
Okay.
I know Frank Wolf, and you, Barbara Comstock, are no Frank Wolf. That should have been the ad that they put on.
Instead they said, Barbara Comstock, you don't have a real job. Not the best choice for you
No,
guys.
Barbara Comstock, you don't have a real job that cares about the people, because all
Is that
you
what he
are,
said?
all you
Is
are.
that what he said?
That's what he
You don't
said.
have a real
That's
job.
what he said
First
when he
of all,
explained
Jim,
it.
Jim has not explained the origin of that quote.
Yeah,
that
go
was
ahead.
her opponent, John Faust, who
Right.
said that about her, right?
Right.
Okay.
John Faust said about Barbara Comstock.
Yeah,
she's
we've
never
already
had a real
we've
job.
already seen the commercials.
At a
Okay.
time when we have a dysfunctional government, the
Is that
last
what he
thing in the
said?
world. This is what I'm saying.
Okay.
And which I do believe is what he's been saying.
Well, perhaps you're a better candidate than John Faust.
I'm not running for anything. I think I've reached a level where I have a good profession. The race is about who are we going to get in Congress who's going to make a difference. Mark Warner is a guy who can work with other people. John Faust is a guy who can work with other people.
So is Barbara.
No, she is not. She is a person that ideology trumps cooperation, compromise, and everything else, whether it's women's rights, whether it's workers' rights, whether it's energy, and her life, she should
you're
be
saying
in opposition.
that John Faust is willing to compromise on women's rights and he's willing to compromise on workers' rights?
Yes, I believe he is, about
Okay,
everything.
Which women's right would he compromise on?
Well, what woman's right are you concerned about?
I'm-
Equal pay?
I'm asking,
I
you
think
said
he would.
it.
I think he would fight for equal
I think
pay.
John meant compromise
Okay.
as in not
I
support.
want to know what he's going. You said that Barbara Comstock will not compromise on anything, but John Faust will compromise
think
on
John
anything. I
Faust
want to
would-
know what woman's right on the litany of things is John Faust willing to throw under the bus?
I think
Throwing under the bus is already presuming an ideological position that matters in governing in Congress. I don't think women's rights ever have to be made an issue if we're going to be redefining women based on a personhood amendment, compromising Supreme Court decisions, compromising workers by keeping the minimum wage low or eliminating it, by ignoring workers' rights in the workplace and safety, by compromising the environment with
And
toxic
so those
fumes
are all
and so forth.
compromises that John Faust is willing to make.
Those are all things that should be the agenda of the Congress. And
But-
she's
but-
against
but
all of
what
those things.
What is he compromising? I mean, you know, I guess
Okay,
I'm just.
John Faust-
what is he willing to throw under the bus
John
to compromise?
Faust-
to
No,
get
see,
something done?
you have the wrong opinion. The opinion of government is to serve the people. She does
Right.
not.
Whoa.
I take that as a symbol.
I
take that as a word from God.
I
and
think,
your
I think
candidate
John.
almost hit you in the head there.
I think-
Republicans
This-
fell
Well,
off the
it would
wall.
hit the wrong Republican. Here we have a moderate Republican.
Wow,
you know.
I think you have the wrong idea. What he means is that everyone should compromise with the Democrats.
No,
That's
no.
what-
I've sat in meetings. I've sat in meetings with
All right,
Republicans.
I'm going to let Marlene speak for a minute here. We've got 3 minutes
I
left.
think what John Faust would compromise on would be budget issues, primarily. Maybe not social issues, but budget issues. He's very strong on allowing women to make their own decisions as far as health care goes. He's a strong advocate for education, which is why I started Educators for Faust. He spearheaded the effort to get full-day kindergarten in Fairfax County. We need it badly in Loudoun County. I don't think Prince William has all full-day kindergarten either. And he would work with local politicians on issues like that, as well as across the aisle. Barbara Comstock couldn't remember ever teaming up with a Democrat on a bill.
Actually, she did mention at least one issue.
In the Post interview, she could not.
I infrequently agree with the Washington Post, but they said that in their non-endorsement, they said that
that wouldn't have happened with Ben Bradley.
They said that John Faust, had trouble deviating from the prepared talking points of the Democratic Party.
Well,
and so
they
therefore,
basically
because
commented
he
on
didn't
his
have
style.
Mike,
be honest, that was the weirdest non-endorsement because it basically slammed Barbara Comstock for being an ideologue.
Right.
And then they said, but we don't really like John Faust's
He's not
style.
an exciting campaigner.
This is his practice run.
We didn't really like
what
John
it said was
Faust.
the guy that John Faust doesn't have any ideas. He just
doesn't say
gets
that.
the talking
It
points.
doesn't
come on.
He said it wasn't an exciting campaigner.
The question in this,
Mike agrees with the Washington Post.
The question in this race is who is
You
the
won't ever
natural
make
heir
that
to
error.
Frank Wolf. Barbara Comstock is the natural heir to Frank Wolf.
Here's the
never
thing
an
about
ideologue,
elections,
though.
turning
No, he
people
wasn't.
into cartoon characters.
Frank Wolf is out there campaigning for Barbara Comstock all
John
the time.
Faust
He just
is
cut a
a
commercial
lawyer
for her.
who's served his
a
community,
party-line
reduced Barbara's taxes on her place, despite the fact she accuses him of raising taxes. She's paying less taxes because he was her supervisor. And yet she writes ads. We talk about
So the loss of value of her home had nothing to do with it. It was all John Faust that did it.
Wait.
So he caused the recession.
If you
is what you're telling me
if
by
you're
your
paying
math.
because if you're paying less on your house, there's been a concrete decision by the Board of Supervisors to take a look at the rate and the value because it's all computerized, and you make a decision that either reduces or increases taxes. And he made a decision with other members of the Board of Supervisors that reduced her taxes despite her ad that says to the contrary.
That's not actually
That
true.
is
You
true.
guys, we have 1 minute left. I
When
know
you
we're
look at
having
the
so
whole
much fun
picture.
that time is flying by.
Anyway, Barbara
but
Comstock wins that one.
We need, okay, so
Yeah,
we've got,
going away.
we've
8th
got,
District, I'll go next.
okay, real quick.
8th District
prediction.
was designed as a Democratic district. Nothing about that.
This is Don Beyer
This is Don
versus
Beyer
Micah.
versus Micah Edmonds.
Okay.
Should I go knock that down right now?
No.
I hold the sign up.
Micah's a 13-year personal friend of mine, great guy, but it is a Democratic district. Interestingly, Don Beyer hasn't campaigned. He's just taken, and once he got the nomination, he
Well,
just
he's
took it
Don
off.
Beyer.
He's still going to win.
Marlene, anything
in
else?
the 8th, I think Don Beyer wins. In the 10th, John Faust will pull it out. It'll be close, but John Faust will win. And in the 11th,
that's the one to
Jerry
watch.
Conley.
Jim, real quick.
I'm going all Republican. Come on, Micah.
Shocking.
Come on, Micah. And Suzanne Schulte in the 11th.
Well, the only one I haven't commented, well, Beyer, of course. Jerry Connolly is going to win either in a walk.
All
That's
right,
why
we
we
gotta
haven't
wrap it
mentioned
up.
it. Done.
Okay,
Barbara.
so we'll see
And
you
then-
next time. I
This
think
was
we're
too
going to have
calm.
a show to talk about what happened. So that'll be the December show. Go out and vote. That's incredibly important. And we thank you for spending time with us today on Saturday. Happy Election Day.